Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time on this channel, you are welcome. I am A.H.P. I'm an author and I also do business. Now today's video is basically for that part of my channel where we talk about real life issues. And this is the last of the videos that I'm going to be talking about being detained in a mental hospital. Now this one is called Why Did My Parents Take Me to the Mental Hospital? Now, in the last video that I did, well, it's not going to be the last video because the last video actually uploaded before the second to last video that I uploaded. But yeah. But in the video that talks about basically titled "Why Did My Friends Take Me to the Mental Hospital?" That's the video I'm talking about. That same year, 2009, a couple of months after being released out of St. Andrews, I only stayed one night in St. Andrews, by the way, but after I got released out of St. Andrews, a few months, of being in the community, as they would say, like at home and everything, I ended up again, like, I ended up being taken to the mental hospital. But before I was taken to the mental hospital by my parents, right? Basically, at the time I was married. I'm no longer married. Um, And so yeah, basically I was, at my husband's, in my marriage at home, so to speak. Um, and I ended up starting to prophesy to him and everything. And bear in mind, he's not a believer, and however, his mom is a Christian, like born again Christian. Um, and so I end up prophesying to him and everything, and then he ends up taking me to my mum and dad's house, like my stepmom and my dad's house, which was like 10 minutes from where we lived. And then when I got to the house, basically I started to prophesy like over my niece and everything. And bear in mind, like, my family, they profess to be Christians, but they're not born again Christians, and so they just go to church. Yeah. And yeah, so at the time they weren't born again or anything like that. Now they got born again, they're baptized again. Yeah, it's one of them. It's one of those ones. But so basically, I was prophesying over my niece, and the mom got freaked out because she's not a believer. And then the whole day, like, I had basically open vision again. But this time I didn't just have an open vision, like, where I could see like things to do with that neighborhood, like, because we lived in Southeast London at the time. And so I wasn't just seeing things to do with that area, but I began to physically feel in the spirit, like, what goes on in that area. And I felt like cuttings on my body and on my feet. I felt like cuttings, like somebody who cuts themselves, like when you've been cut by like paper cuts, or razor blade cuts. And that's the kind of feeling that I was feeling through my body. And I couldn't explain it. And then all of a sudden, like, I began to say, blow the trumpet sound, blow the trumpet sound. So they were all like freaked out. So I ended up being, going to my room at the time in my mom and dad's house. And then I was there like for hours on end. And then, like, had my lunch, everything was fine. Obviously, like, when I say everything was fine, to me, like, everything is fine, but to them, they like freaked out, like, why is she talking, and why is she talking the way she's talking? kind of thing. And then by 3:30, like my brothers, they had come back from school, and they came over with their friends and everything. And so I began to prophesy over my brothers, like my younger brothers, and their friends, and they got freaked out. Like they freaked out, and then that's when like my dad was like, right, I've had enough of this. He just held me by my hand, dragged me out of the house with my stepmom following him, and then we got into the car. Like they put me into the car, and they drove me to the hospital, Maudsley Hospital. Now Maudsley Hospital is one of the biggest UK psychiatric, what's it called, um, training institution in the UK. So basically, they took me to that hospital, and I kid you not, before I actually got into the ward, like when I got into the hospital ground, again, bear in mind that my spiritual eyes were opened, but so I could see in the spirit, but my parents, they couldn't see what I was seeing. So to them, they're like, she's nuts. So basically, I saw in the vision, as far a line of people, a line of young people, as far as your eyes could see, you know, like there was no end to this line basically, and it just went into the hospital. Like these people were going into the hospital, and so I began to call them out by name, you know, and I was saying, come out, so and so. So for example, I'd say, Sean, come out, Lisa, come out. And my dad was like, shut up, because for him, he couldn't see what I could see. Because for me, at that time, it felt so, like it was more real than like the physical. And so that was like the reality for me at that time. Like, so, what's it called? So I started calling them out, and my dad was like, shut up, shut up, shut up. But when I finally got into the hospital, got to the reception, I kid you not, the receptionist there, although he was like he was basically a human being like you and I. However, you could see the spirit governing him. Like his face became distorted, like a demonic takeover, like he was taken over. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like this is crazy. And then eventually, what's it called, eventually I got went through the assessment. They put me into the ward, but they began to pin me down, like to what's it called, to have me restrained basically. And I was screaming at them, shouting, and you know, they cut off my wedding ring, they cut off they cut off my wedding ring, they injected me, and I was shouting at them, shouting. But then what's it called, the only thing that calmed me down was my husband at the time. What's it called, his countenance would change. Like his countenance was, can you see this light here? Like that's what his eyes were like. So he just had light over him, and he had a peaceful presence. That's the only thing that could calm me down. So every time he came into the room, I would be quiet, I would be calm, I would cooperate and everything. Every time he left the room, I would shout, I would be shouting, I'd be speaking in tongues and just praying, like, and I'll be shouting, like, because I could see the doctors here, there's more to them than the physical eyes could see. So then they assumed that my husband at the time, that he was domestically abusing me, which was not the case at all. It's just that he had a different countenance. He had a peaceful countenance. And I believe that God overshadowed him just for my sake. Like, and so even with my parents, like when they came into the room, I would scream at them. Like I would scream at them. And so like the night, obviously I slept in the hospital. The following morning, I had to go for an interview, and this woman, this nurse, she was um, she was asking me questions like, "How did you get here?" So I narrated to her the whole story of how I got into the hospital, because basically what they thought was that I had forgotten how like I got into the hospital, but I had not forgotten. I knew I was in my right mind. So so they were like, she was like, no. And the reason why they cut off my ring was basically they thought that they'll keep me in the hospital, and then that's how like I'd separate from my husband at the time and basically change my identity without me knowing. And because as far as they were concerned, they thought I was off my head, which was not the case. So this woman, she was like asking me question, the same question over and over and over again, and then she would ask me like different questions, and then like, because of being under medication, because they injected me again, like my body, um so the medication was making me like drowsy and stuff. So I'd speak in tongues, and then I'll be able to like what's it called? Able to respond to her. And because I was at that moment, I didn't care. I was like, you know what, you already think that I'm off my head, so it doesn't matter if I'm gonna be praying in tongues, like quietly of course. Um and then, you know, respond to you. So she'll be like, when I was speaking in tongues, she would ask me like, what are you saying? And then I'm like, no, I'm not talking to you. And then what's it called? And then I'll respond to her question. And then eventually like she finished her what's it called, her questions, and then I was released to go like back into my room. I kid you not, this hospital, right? Or you just have your ward, of you just have your room, of course. You can go and bath, you can eat. They have food and everything like that. They have the communal area. There were so many people there, and then they have the garden, and it has levels. It has so many levels. So I was on the bottom, and I didn't know that the more you kicked off, the more you got angry, the more you got irritated with them, the more that they thought you were, what's it called, deteriorating in your mind, then they'll move you up on the higher level of that hospital. And the higher you go up on levels of hospital, like severe in terms of severity, what's it called, of different wards, they have different wards basically, and the higher you go up, the more difficult it is for you to come out of the mental institution. So I remember like, so they have like therapy room, psychotherapy room, where they like, you can go and do art. So I walked into one of those rooms, like the painting room. So I went and did to do some painting, and in that room I met a young man, and so I introduced myself to him, and then he introduced himself to me. And for confidentiality, I will not mention his name. However, so I asked him like, why are you here? And then he said, well, I died. I was like, what do you mean you died? Like, you died? And then he was like, yeah, I died. And then I was like, so why are you here? Like, it didn't shock me that he died, like what he was telling me. So I was like, okay, so why are you here? And then it was like, well, I used to be a street person, like, I used to be rough, like on the streets, and, you know, so one day I was driving, what's it called? A truck ran me over, and I died instantaneously. And what's it called? And then, give me a minute, guys. My device. Hopefully it doesn't. Okay. So yeah, so my battery was gonna die, so I just put it on safe. So yeah, so basically he said he died, and when he died, he met Jesus. And Jesus told him, the only way I'll give you your life back is if you live for me for the rest of your life. Like, you come off the street life and you live for me for the rest of your life. So I was like, okay, but why are you here? And then he said, well, I narrated the story of what I saw, of like what Jesus told me and to my family, and they thought I was off my head, like they thought I was mentally ill. So they called the police, and the police brought me here. So I was like, okay. And so that, like, that was baffling. And then I was like, okay. And then I stayed in that hospital for several days. And like one of the days I saw like on another ward, like a friend of mine who, it was the hardest thing to ever witness. Like I saw how like he was messed up, like he did not look the way you'd expect a person to look. Like he was gone, like completely gone. And this boy, he used to smoke weed, he used to smoke weed. And you know, he was fine, but to see him in that condition, like in the worst ward, for me it was heartbreaking. And you know, drugs is apparently one of the causes for mental health issues, for mental illness. And I could bear witness with that because I had another friend who was at uni, and literally she smoked marijuana for the first time, and she nearly jumped off a two-story building, like live. Like I was watching her. One minute she was talking normal, like how I'm talking to you guys. The next minute she was ready to jump over, like over the balcony, and literally we had to hold her down and what's it called, keep her away from that place until like she sobered up. So I would say, like, don't take drugs, don't even try it. Don't even try it. Like, even if you appear, because this girl, she never used to smoke. She just went along with what other people were doing in uni. So she just experimented it because her friends were smoking. And so um after like a week and 4 days of being in that hospital, I ended up being released into the community again. Like I went to my dad's house and everything. And then this time they had like the community nurses, they kept coming to see me and everything, and they kept asking me questions. And I was just like, you know what, I'm fine. There's actually nothing wrong with me. Like, I'm actually good. And then they put me, whilst before leaving the hospital, because it's the largest training psychiatric institution in the UK. Students came over and they asked me if I could take part in their 12 months research basically, and I agreed. Because the reason why I agreed, I wanted to find out how people are diagnosed in the UK with mental illness, how they diagnose you, how they treat you, and all of that stuff. So that was literally just to satisfy my curiosity, okay, and to pick up information that I know that I would need, okay. And so yeah, so I took part in that. And every time I went for like for the what's it called, for the assessment, they'll take my blood, they'll take my what's it called, my saliva, because they're trying to see your DNA traits and all of that. They'll ask me questions, and some of the questions were very intense because they'll ask you like your health, like how many times you exercise, whether you drink, whether you smoke, your sexual orientation, and all of that. And some of the questions I found personally that they were not necessary, like it was not necessary, but I answered it and everything. And then after 12 months, that what's it called, finished the study and everything, and I had no relapse as they would expect. So they expect you to have relapses, basically. That's what they expect you to have. But I didn't have any relapse or anything like that. But then, so then after that, like I was at home and everything, my parents were panicking. Every time I would go to church, like they'll be panicking because they thought it was a church issue, and I'm just like, no. Oh yeah, basically when we had the review meeting, the psychiatrist who was in the lead of the ward, told me like, don't go to Pentecostal church because it seems like you're sensitive to the atmosphere. And I was just like, I was just laughing. And then and then they were like, can you hear things? And then I was like, I can hear God. And then and then they were like, can you see things? Like, what can you see? And then I was like, I can't tell you what I can see, but if your eyes are open, like, you'll be able to see what I can see, but I can't tell you. And then they were like, why can't you tell us? And then I was like, because God hasn't allowed me to tell you what I can see. And so they got annoyed and everything, but eventually they left me and I was released. Before I got released out of the hospital, a man came to me like one morning. I was going to take my medicine and lined up in the queue, and the guy came to me. He was a healthcare worker, and he came to me and he was like, "We've done every test on you. We've done like mental health test. We can't find anything wrong with you. We've done pregnancy test. We can't find anything wrong with you. We've even done an AIDS test on you." I was like, what? AIDS test? Like, what? In my mind, I was just like, what? AIDS test? Like, why would you think? Anyway, so I was like, okay. I was like, yeah, I know because I told you there's nothing wrong with me. And so he left, and then I ended up being released. This time I wasn't sectioned or anything like that. I ended up being released, and the community mental health nurses, they just tried to keep me on medication. But when I went to see my friend, who I will not mention, um, whose name I will not mention because he's well known, um, he was like, come off the medication, come off the medication. And then and I came off the medication and everything, and it was like, that's when he was like, oh, I believe like God allowed you to go there because you are actually going to write a book. I believe you're going to write a book about this issue. And so that is when 10 years later, after 10 years forward, after that word that he said, I don't think he even, because when I told him, he even forgotten about it. But what's it called, 10 years fast forward, that is when I was able to write the book Legion. So Legion talks about God's perspective on mental illness. And you know, there is a facet that God wants people to know that a lot of people don't know or don't believe that it's even true. um, you know, some people within the health institution are actually demonically afflicted and oppressed, and that affects their mind, especially those who are suicidal. And that's the challenge that I always what's it called, face whenever approached by psychologists and psychiatrists. And I tell them that, you know, these people who you consider to be mentally ill and they just need medication, but they're suicidal, these people, they need more than medication. They need the power of God. They need to encounter, they need to be delivered, they need to go through deliverance. And because the spirit that afflicts them causes them to, you know, they say, some of them, they say they can hear sounds, they can hear voices that tells them to commit suicide and stuff like that. And I always tell the psychiatrists and the psychologists, like, look, that cannot be cured. That suicidal feeling cannot be cured. It's only the power of God that can set that person free from suicide, especially when it's not there's two types of suicidal people. There are people who just feel hopeless, okay, because of life's issues. They feel hopeless, therefore they think that suicide is the only way out. However, there are people who are actually demonically tormented and oppressed, where they hear demonic voices telling them to kill themselves. Those are the ones I'm talking to. Those are the ones I'm talking about. And no amount of medication can help them. The only thing that can help them is the power of God. So when you minister to them deliverance and set them free from the spirit of death that hides itself as suicide. And so I always tell the health professionals within the mental health institution that if medicine was the cure for these people, we wouldn't see so many young people and so many older people who are suicidal still commit suicide within the mental institution. If medicine could cure them from suicide, they wouldn't commit suicide. We wouldn't see the rate of suicide that we see. And that is why, God allowed me to begin to feel the incisions. And in Southeast London has the highest rate of suicide, the highest rate of self-harming, the highest rate of mentally ill people, both young and older people. But majority of people of the patients in the mental institution are actually young people, which is very sad. It's young people. And so if you have family members who have mental health issues and they're suicidal, I just pray that God will set them free from the spirit of death. I pray that God would completely set you free. And I pray that that God will silence the voice of the enemy of your life, that you no longer hear the voice that tells you to commit suicide. In Jesus' name. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section below and I'll answer them as best as possible. However, if you make inappropriate comments, because I do go through the comments on my channel, if you make any inappropriate comments, I will delete them. Best be reassured. So I would like tell you in advance, if you have inappropriate comments, don't comment them on this channel. If you have rude comments, like you want to be a troll, so to speak, please, it's best you don't do that, because I'm just going to delete your comment and call it a day with you. So however, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, feel free to comment. If your comments or your questions are a little bit more private, you can send me DM on my social media platform, on my Facebook or my Twitter or my Instagram, and I'll answer you. And again, if you send me DMs that are inappropriate, I will block you. If you if you send me inappropriate DMs, I'm going to block you and I'll not respond to you. So without further ado, I'll call this the end of the video and have a good night, guys. See you later in the next video. Bye.